Well, new OECD figures show that over the last 20 years, the gap between rich and poor has grown more here than in any other developed country. But that hasn't come as a huge surprise to those trying to do something about it. The Council of Christian Social Services runs a project called Closer Together, which is focused on closing that gap. Their policy analyst, Paul Barber, joins us now. Good morning, Paul.
Kia ora, good morning.
Yeah, I guess it isn't a surprise that we're being told we've got a big gap between rich and poor. But what is a surprise is that the OECD is starting to make more of an issue of this. Is this part of a growing trend really worldwide now that it's becoming a real danger for economies to have such a big gap?
Exactly. New Zealand is a world leader in, has the dubious distinction of being a world leader in the growth and income inequality, and that's been going on now for more than 2 decades. And this is a huge wake-up call to us, the fact that the whole OECD now is noticing this trend as well, as that gap between the highest incomes and the lowest incomes grows. All right,
what in your view is causing this big gap?
Well, There've been a whole series of factors leading to this growth in the gap, where we've seen the highest incomes rise. What we saw from the mid-80s through to the mid-90s in New Zealand was a very rapid rise in the highest incomes, whereas the lowest incomes actually remain static and have actually fallen. And in a 20-year period from the mid-80s to the mid-2000s, we actually saw 25% net increase for the highest income earning groups, whereas the lowest income groups actually saw their incomes in real terms decrease. And that was driven by mainly rising incomes for those highest earners, and the incomes for those on the lowest incomes remaining static or even dropping.
But we've got a little bit of a problem in that we want an economy where people are rewarded for being skilled. A meritocracy, if you like, where you are rewarded for your hard work and your skill. How do you marry those two together? Because if you do that, then there are going to be winners and losers, aren't there?
Well, I think what we've been seeing and what's been going on is that people haven't been rewarded for their skill and their effort. You've seen a relatively small group of people being rewarded handsomely, and those in the middle and certainly those at the lowest incomes, although they're working hard, they have skills to contribute, those have not been recognised. And what we've seen, and one of the key drivers around the gap between the highest and the lowest incomes has been the fact that even though people have been working harder, their productivity has risen. Their productivity has risen faster than actual wage increases for most people.
But how do we determine which jobs should be paid more? Because at the moment, presumably, it's the market determining that, and that, as you say, is leading to a small group at the top receiving too much, in your view. We can't throw the market out. How do we get around that?
Well, I think the market's not doing a very good job at the moment. And one of our real challenges is to encourage those who are involved in the markets to actually look at themselves and say, what are they doing to actually deal with some of the issues? Why is it that some of the highest salaries in New Zealand are up to 200 times the minimum wage or the average wage? And even within government, we see very large discrepancies between the highest paid executives and the average earners. And
do we just stop you there for a second? Is the solution here, in your view, we've already got working for families, just transferring quite a lot of income. Does that need to be increased substantially here in order to level things out?
Well, I think there's some things. The Working for Families package has been the most effective way of reducing income inequality and helping people on the lowest incomes. But it hasn't reached a whole group of people on the lowest incomes, and we really do need to extend that to people who are not in work, to extend those benefits to those who, because it's the children, the young people who are of families who are on the lowest incomes, and also dependent on benefits for incomes who are actually carrying the brunt of this whole generation we've had of inequality. We've seen children growing up in families that have only known this great gap between the rich and the poor, and we've seen that impacts on their health, on their opportunities to get ahead. If we want to talk about a society where people can get ahead, I'm afraid what's been happening for a whole bunch of kids and young people is that they've not been given that opportunity, and it's one of our challenges now to actually address that.
Paul Barber, thank you very
concretely.
much, from the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services. This is a huge issue which is confronting the world at the moment. We're seeing it with Occupy Wall Street. It is a growing movement, there's no doubt about it. What is significant is that the OECD, which is essentially the rich club of 30 rich clubs in the countries in the world, are telling New Zealand that you need to do something about it, because usually the OECD is telling us to privatise, cut taxes and do things like that, rather than look at increasing taxes for the wealthy, because they're basically saying it's getting to the point where the gap's so big it is completely counterproductive even for those at the top, because you are going to start hurting, the whole economy is going to start suffering. So do something about it, regardless of whether there is actually an ethical or a moral obligation as well.
Will that make a difference, the fact that the OECD is...
Well, I just think it's part of a movement. There's momentum building globally, and policymakers, parliamentarians around the world are going to have to respond somehow.